All right, so once we're finished with the germination stage, we're going to uncover those trays. And I touched on this a little bit in the last section, is when to do that uncovering. So uncovering trays is really the end of the germination phase and the beginning of the light phase in which crops green up. And so the exposure to light is the thing that turns them to green and readies them for harvest. So let's take a look at, this is a question that comes up so much about when to uncover a crop. And I take for granted that it's pretty obvious when to uncover a crop, but I think in the beginning there was a lot of struggle for me, like, is this the best time? Is this too early? Is this too late? So what are we looking for in terms of uncovering? So I think the notion I use is when does the crop look like it wants to be uncovered? And when I look at these radish, it's clear that they're getting out and they want to be out. So there's two things I'm looking at here. One is I'm looking at these edge microgreens coming up to the like above the bottom of the tray above them. And then I can also see that the stacks now, even though we spaced them really evenly, the trays are starting to shift. And this means there's a bit of a kink in the stem and the tray isn't centered anymore. So these are the two things that I'm generally looking for. And as soon as that tray starts to shift, that's starting to give us an indicator that the crop needs to be uncovered. Here's a look at some sunflower as well, and you can see the same sort of thing. We've got good stem development. We've got some of the shoots coming up above the bottom of the top tray, and we see the trays being shifted over to the side. So this is the thing we're kind of looking for to determine when our time to uncover is. Now generally, actually here, so if you take a look, here's some taller stacks, and you can see on these taller stacks, you know, the risk of tipping. You can see it over here. And I definitely have had some stacks in the past that have tipped right over, which is, again, why we end up going with just the 3 in the stack. So this is the thing we're looking for, is a little bit of a shifting, and the microgreens sort of coming up above the tray above them. Now, when we uncover them, they are going to be, for the most part, they are going to have no green on them. Basically, you know, depending on how your system is, because everything has been in the dark, there's been no opportunity to photosynthesize. And this here is actually the perfect crop of sunflower, which is probably a combination of good growing methods and really good seed, which has very, very good germination, very even distribution. And it really is the stacking and covering of the with the weight that keeps the even distribution. It means the quicker growing seed is slowed down, and that allows the slower growing seed to keep up during the germination phase, and then that usually continues during the greening phase. We can see a little bit of green on the edges here because there's been some light, but at this point, not a whole lot. Now in this system, we can see a lot of greening here. And this is the case where you've got really warm temperatures in the summer. These trays are really, they're growing fast, and by the time I'm getting to uncover them, there's already good exposure, and there's some good greening happening around the edges. Now this is usually where we're going to see a couple of things, is these edge shoots are going to be a little more mature, and on some crops like radish or sunflower, you're going to start seeing potentially the first signs of true leaves. And so the 2 leaves that start with the seed are your cotyledons, or your seed leaves, but then your next layer of leaves starts coming in. And that's really when we're going to start seeing bitterness and like fuzziness in different crops, and something we really want to avoid. So getting that timing is pretty crucial, and that's another reason to keep the stacks really close together so you don't get light coming in on the sides. Come on to, here's just a crop of wheatgrass that was just uncovered as well. You can see very little green on even the edges there. So my general approach is to uncover earlier rather than later. I find generally that's a better approach. And what we find is and wheatgrass as an example, you might look at it in the morning and think it's not ready to uncover, but by noon it is, or by the end of the day it's actually too late. So you need to learn your growing system to determine when the best time to uncover is. So that's really important, and it takes a little bit of practice, but you'll get to know that fairly quickly. And yeah, my general approach is earlier is usually better than later, but that's going to be that's really going to vary, I think, between different crops. So here's a look at some sunflower that's got some pretty good growth, but you can see there's actually still lots of hulls attached, and this is actually a trait of the seed. So over time, you're going to start to notice differences between batches of seed and their different characteristics. This is a pretty good looking crop, but those hulls become a bit of a challenge when you get into the harvesting process and removing the hulls to have a more sellable product. So really, it's really important to look for those sort of variations in your crops to understand how to manage things. There's not a lot you can do here. I find with this case with sunflower, an even warmer germination area can help them open up a little earlier, knock those hulls off. Many of which will still come off when they green up and then the seeds open up and pop that hull off. Here's a look at a nice pea crop that was just uncovered. You can see a little bit of greening there as well, and some quite tall shoots. And pea is something even at this stage, even though there's no green, they're quite tender and quite nice to eat. So you'll see often soybean sprouts in the market. So those are something that are grown completely in the dark. So they're very tender, they're very watery, but not a whole lot of flavor. So it's one of the things that often differentiates sprouts from microgreens is the photosynthetic stage, which does change the nature of the product. So there is an option of actually doing a second covering, and this is where you're keeping them covered, but you're taking the pressure off the top. And we have just found that with some batches of seed, for whatever reason, they prefer this. And if you think about what's happening here is you're taking the pressure off, so you're relieving things for the crop to grow up quicker, but without having the light, what you're causing the crop to do is stretch for the light. And so that's a way of often making the crop a little bit taller. And we would do this maybe if the conditions were a little cool, and we needed to have a taller crop to make sure we could actually harvest things. And I've found with some pea crops that they just for some reason needed a little bit of extra time in the dark, but did not want the weight on top. And so yeah, what you're causing them to do is stretch a little bit here. So here's a sunflower crop we've done that with. Yeah, different crops might need this at different times. So yeah, it's a way of basically stretching the crop in order to get it a little bit taller. So yeah, I think the general take home when you look at when to uncover is number one, when you see the tray starting to shift from side to side, and when you see the microgreens sort of growing up above the tray that's on top of them. So very, very clear indicators there, and you can play with them in different ways, but look to uncover more on the early end than the late end if you have limitations as to when you can uncover. Keep in mind, your system is almost always going to dictate when you uncover. If you need to uncover in a certain day, often to make space for your next crop. And so instead of deciding when to uncover or when not to uncover, you're often looking at how to change the conditions to make sure the crop is ready to be uncovered when you need it to be uncovered. That usually means bumping up the temperature. So it's hard to slow growth down. We can actually do that in the growing stage by restricting water, but we can often speed growth up by adding more warmth. So now that we have germinated and unstacked our trays and are getting ready for growth, let's take a look at the growth phase.